If you had asked me a week ago, I would have told you my life was perfect. A great job, a beautiful wife, and a future that seemed set in stone. But everything unraveled faster than I could have imagined. One night, one choice, and suddenly I was drowning in secrets I never saw coming. The woman I loved, the life I trusted, it was all built on lies. And by the time I finally saw the truth, there was no going back. I woke up to the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint glow of early morning light filtering through the blinds. Beside me, Emily was still asleep, her dark hair spilling over the pillow. I watched her for a moment, taking in the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing, before slipping out of bed as quietly as possible. Mornings were my sanctuary. A quick jog along the Venice Beach boardwalk, the scent of salt in the air, the sound of waves crashing in the distance. It was the best way to clear my head before another long shift at the hospital. As I ran, my mind wandered over the usual things. Upcoming surgeries, patient cases, weekend plans with Emily. Life was good, simple, stable. When I got back to our apartment, the smell of coffee hit me instantly. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, already dressed for work. "Morning, doctor," she said with a smirk, handing me a cup. "Morning, attorney," I shot back, kissing her on the cheek. Emily was a defense lawyer, sharp as hell, and just as relentless in court as she was in arguments with me. We had been together for 5 years, married for 2, and even though our jobs kept us busy, we always found time for each other. "You're home late tonight, right?" she asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Yeah, I got back-to-back surgeries. Should be home by 10. "All right. I have a dinner meeting with a client, so don't wait up." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Emily's job often required late nights. That was just the reality of being married to someone as ambitious as she was. We finished breakfast, shared a quick kiss, and went our separate ways. Her to her office in downtown LA, me to the hospital. The day was a whirlwind of consultations and operations, but in between, I found time to grab lunch with my best friend, Jason, who was also a surgeon. "Dude, you look exhausted," he said, taking a sip of his iced coffee. "Long week," I admitted. Jason raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not just getting old?" "Shut up," I laughed, shaking my head. We talked about work, upcoming hospital changes, the usual. Then, as we were about to leave, Jason hesitated. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He looked unusually serious. "Have you ever felt like something in your life was just a little off?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" Jason exhaled, shaking his head. "Never mind. Forget I said anything. It was an odd moment, but I let it go." That evening, I grabbed takeout on my way home and ate alone in front of the TV. Emily still wasn't back. I checked my phone, no messages. But I didn't think twice about it. The hospital was a battlefield today. The moment I stepped through the doors, I was pulled into an emergency. Multiple victims from a freeway pileup. It was a nightmare. Broken ribs, collapsed lungs, arterial bleeds. 3 surgeries back to back. No breaks. No time to think. Just react, cut, stitch, stabilize. By the time I was scrubbing out of my final surgery, my hands were cramping from exhaustion. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind nothing but bone-deep fatigue. "Rough day?" One of the younger interns, Will, smirked as he handed me a fresh towel. I shot him a look. "Unless you enjoy pulling glass shards out of a guy's chest cavity. Yeah. Rough day." He chuckled, but then hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. "Spit it out," I sighed, drying my hands. He rubbed the back of his neck. "There was this one guy from the crash. Before he passed out, he kept mumbling something weird." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Will hesitated. "I don't know. Something like, you never really know who you're sleeping next to." It was creepy as hell. I stared at him for a second, then shook my head. "Patients say all kinds of things under stress. Don't let it get in your head." He nodded, but I could tell it still unsettled him. I checked my phone. No messages from Emily. She was probably still at her dinner meeting. I wasn't worried. The smell of coffee drifted through the apartment as I rinsed my cereal bowl in the sink. Emily was sitting at the counter, dressed in a crisp white blouse, scrolling through emails on her phone. She looked effortlessly put together, as always. "Big day?" I asked, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. "Same as always." Meetings, edits, 100 emails to answer. She glanced up with a smile. You? Back-to-back surgeries. Gonna be a long one. She slid off the stool and walked over, wrapping her arms around my waist. Don't work too hard. I smirked. I'll try. Her perfume lingered as she pulled away. She grabbed her purse, hesitated for a second, then turned back to me. I might be late tonight. That dinner with the French author. Yeah, you mentioned. I'll text you when I'm on my way home, she added. Sounds good. She left, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I stood there for a second, sipping the last of my coffee, then turned toward the kitchen. That's when I noticed the overfilled trash can by the fridge. With a sigh, I pulled out the bag and went to tie it up, but as I yanked the plastic handles, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. A small, torn piece of paper. At first, I barely glanced at it. Probably just a crumpled receipt. But as I bent down to pick it up, I noticed the jagged edge where it had been ripped and the messy handwriting across the surface. A phone number, or at least part of one. The last few digits were missing. I frowned, turning the paper over. No name, no other markings. Not mine, not Emily's. A weird feeling settled in my gut. I stared at the paper for a few seconds, debating whether or not to toss it. In the end, I folded it and slipped it into my pocket. By the time I stepped into the chaos of the hospital, the paper was already forgotten. I heard the door open, just as the clock on my nightstand glowed 2:13 a.m. Emily was late. Really late. I stayed still, keeping my body relaxed, pretending to be asleep as she walked in. Her movements were careful, deliberate, too deliberate. Normally, she would toss her bag onto the dresser without a second thought, let out a tired sigh, maybe even wake me up just to complain about her long day. But tonight, she was quiet. Her heels barely made a sound on the hardwood floor as she crossed the room. Then she stopped. She lingered near the bed, like she was hesitating. A second passed, then another. She let out a slow breath, then shrugged off her jacket. That's when I caught it. A scent. Cologne. Not perfume. Men's cologne. Mixed with something else. Maybe alcohol, maybe something deeper, muskier. It wasn't mine. It wasn't ours. My stomach clenched, but I forced my breathing to stay steady. She moved past me, heading toward the bathroom. I cracked my eyes open just a fraction, barely enough to see her in the dim light. Emily stood in front of the mirror, pulling her hair into a loose ponytail. Her reflection was blurred in the shadows, but something caught my eye. A faint red smudge on her chin. It was subtle, barely noticeable. Lipstick. Smudged. And she hadn't been wearing red lipstick when she left. I swallowed hard, staring at the ceiling as I listened to the soft sound of fabric rustling, followed by the steady rush of water. She was showering. She didn't always shower before bed, especially not after just a dinner. For the first time, a real, undeniable suspicion crawled into my chest. Morning. Emily was already in the kitchen when I woke up, dressed in a casual sweater and jeans, sipping her coffee as if last night had never happened. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, warm and familiar, but it didn't settle me the way it usually did. I grabbed a mug from the cabinet and poured myself some, watching her carefully. Morning, doctor, she greeted me with a smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I forced a small grin. Morning. Late night. She sighed, stretching her arms above her head. Yeah, the dinner ran forever. You know how these literary types are. They could talk about nothing for hours. I nodded, watching her closely. Her makeup was perfect again. No sign of the lipstick smudge. I hesitated, debating whether to say something, whether to ask. What would she say if I did? Would she lie? Would she tell me the truth? Instead, I grabbed my coffee and took a slow sip. My phone buzzed on the table, and I glanced down at it. That number. I hadn't thought about it since I found the torn scrap of paper. But now, I needed to know. I picked up my phone and typed the digits into a search engine. For a moment, nothing came up, just blank results. Then, a single search result appeared. A listing, a name, a place. My grip tightened around my coffee cup. I knew that place. I looked up at Emily. She was scrolling through her phone, completely at ease, completely normal. And now I was sure something was very, very wrong. I wasn't going to follow her. Not directly. Instead, that afternoon, While Emily was in the shower, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. My hands were steady, my heartbeat wasn't. She had changed her passcode. Of course she had. I put the phone back before she could notice. Plan B. That evening, I installed a tracking app on my own phone. Something subtle, something discreet. It wouldn't give me her exact messages, but it would tell me one thing: where she was going. 10:02 p.m. She left the apartment, saying she was meeting a colleague for a late work session. I waited exactly 5 minutes before opening the app. The little blinking dot on the map was moving, heading west. Not toward her office, not toward a bar. It stopped at a hotel, a very expensive hotel. I grabbed my keys and left. 10:45 p.m. Outside the hotel. The entrance was sleek, lined with luxury cars and doormen in crisp black suits. Emily was already inside. I parked across the street, watching. People came and went, businessmen, socialites, couples. It wasn't the kind of place where you just walked in without a purpose. I needed a different way in. Then I noticed the garage entrance on the side. I crossed the street, moving quickly before I could second-guess myself. 10:52 p.m., parking garage. The air smelled like oil and cold concrete. My footsteps echoed as I moved between cars, searching for hers. Then I saw it, her car, parked near the elevators. It was empty. She was still inside the hotel. I took out my phone, checking the tracking app again. Still here. Then I felt it, a presence behind me. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned, too slow. A fist slammed into my gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, gasping. A man stood in front of me, tall, expensively dressed, and he knew exactly who I was. "You're making a mistake, Jake," he said calmly. I froze. How the hell did he know my name? I gritted my teeth. "Who are you?" "You don't need to know that." He stepped closer. I tensed, preparing for another hit, but he just smiled. "This isn't your world," he said. "Turn around. Go home." I swallowed hard. My mind was racing, but I kept my expression neutral. "I just came to pick up my wife," I said. The man chuckled. "Is that what you think she's doing here?" He took a step back, adjusting his cufflinks. "Last chance," he said. "Walk away now. Or don't, and see what happens next." I clenched my fists. Then my phone vibrated. I glanced down. A new message. From the same unknown number. "You should listen to him." Cold fear crawled up my spine. By the time I looked up again, the man was already walking away, disappearing into the garage's shadows. I stood there, breath unsteady, staring at my phone. Who the hell was watching me? And why did they want me to stop? I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily in that hotel, taking an envelope from that man. The way he spoke to me in the garage, like I had no idea what I was getting myself into. He was right, but I wasn't going to stop. I needed to know the truth. 7:45 a.m. Emily left for work early, kissing my cheek on the way out. "Have a good day," she said with a smile. Like everything was fine. Like she hadn't lied to my face. I watched her walk out the door, my mind already racing. As soon as I heard the elevator ding, I moved. Straight to her office. Her laptop was there. I had never touched it before. Until now. 8:00 a.m. The screen lit up. Password protected. I tried the obvious ones. Our anniversary, her birthday. Nothing. Then I tried something riskier. The name of her first pet. The screen unlocked. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe work emails, maybe nothing. Instead, I found a folder hidden deep in her drive, locked with a second password. This wasn't normal. I hesitated. Then I started digging. 8:30 a.m. The first thing I managed to open was her email. I scrolled through the inbox. Everything looked normal at first. Work messages, promotional spam. But then I noticed something. A second email account. One I had never seen before. And when I clicked on it, my blood ran cold. The messages weren't about work. They were transactions. Large amounts of money being transferred to someone named M. Keller. And the most recent message was short. "The deal is finalized. No more loose ends." I swallowed hard. What the hell had Emily gotten herself into? Then I clicked on another email. It was a forwarded message. A document attached. I opened it. A list of names. I scrolled down. My hands started shaking. My name was on it. 9:00 a.m. I copied everything I could onto a flash drive. Emails, documents, financial records. I didn't even know what I was looking at, but I knew it was important. Then, just as I was about to unplug the laptop, I saw one last thing. A timestamp. A meeting scheduled for tonight. At the same hotel. Emily was going back. Before I could process what that meant. Bang, bang, bang. A loud knock at the door. I jumped, heart pounding. I quickly ejected the flash drive and shoved it into my pocket. I walked to the door, hesitated, then opened it. Two men in suits stood there. Not police. Something else. One of them pulled out a badge. "Mr. Walker," he said calmly. "We need to talk." I glanced past them to the hallway. A third man was there, standing near the elevator. Watching. Trapping me. I forced my face into something neutral. "About what?" The man smiled slightly. "Your wife." His partner stepped forward. "And what you just found on her laptop." My blood went cold. They knew. I felt the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. If they knew about that too. I swallowed, nodding slowly. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." But every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't a conversation. This was a warning. I knew I wasn't supposed to have that key. Yet there I was, gripping it tightly in my pocket while sitting outside a downtown bank, staring at the entrance like it might swallow me whole. It was the same key I had found in Emily's closet, tucked away in a small velvet box. No markings. Just a simple, metallic key that didn't match anything we owned. But last night, after hours of searching, I had found something else, a bank statement. A safety deposit box, registered to her name. I had no idea what she kept there, but I was about to find out. The bank lobby was eerily quiet, the kind of place that smelled like polished wood and old money. A receptionist greeted me with a polite but uninterested smile. I forced a nod, my fingers tightening around the key in my pocket as I told her I was there on behalf of my wife, that she had asked me to pick something up for her. I expected her to ask for proof or to deny me access altogether. But to my surprise, she barely hesitated before leading me down a long hallway lined with private viewing rooms. She pointed me toward one of them and gestured to a small metal box waiting on the table. "Take all the time you need." My pulse hammered in my ears as I slid the key into the lock and felt it turn with a soft click. Inside was nothing but a single, sealed manila envelope. I hesitated, then slowly pulled it out and peeled it open. At first, it looked like nothing special. Financial records, legal contracts, things I barely understood. But then, tucked beneath the papers, I found something else. Photographs. I flipped through them, my breath catching in my throat. Some were surveillance-style shots of Emily standing with men I didn't recognize. Others showed people exchanging envelopes, shaking hands. And then, at the bottom of the stack, I found the last picture, a dead man. His face was bruised, his eyes lifeless. Attached to the back of the photo was a newspaper clipping. "Local businessman found dead. Authorities suspect suicide." But this wasn't a suicide. The ligature marks around his throat told a different story. Someone had wanted it to look like an accident, and Emily, she knew about it. I was still staring at the picture when something in the reflection of the glass table made my stomach drop. Someone was watching me. I turned too fast, nearly knocking the deposit box over. A man stood just outside the viewing room, watching through the narrow glass window. The second our eyes met, he turned and walked away. No, not walked. Left fast, like he didn't want me to follow. Which of course meant I had to. I shoved everything back into the envelope, slammed the box shut, and practically ran out of the room. The hallway was empty. My heart pounded as I moved quickly, scanning the lobby. The man was already near the exit. I pushed through the crowd, keeping my distance, tracking his movements as he stepped outside. The second I hit the sidewalk, I realized my mistake. He wasn't running away. He was leading me somewhere. And like an idiot, I had followed. A car door swung open ahead of him, and another man stepped out. Then the first guy turned back toward me. Too late. I felt the grip on my arm before I even had time to react. "Bad idea," Walker, a low voice muttered. I yanked away, but he was faster, shoving me hard toward the waiting car. My shoulders slammed into the side of it. "Get in." My mind raced. I could fight. I could make a scene. Or I could play along. For now. I clenched my jaw, my eyes darting around, searching for witnesses. The street was busy, but no one was paying attention. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, then exhaled slowly, and I stepped into the car. The door shut behind me. I had just made a terrible mistake. They could have beaten me, killed me, made me disappear, but they didn't. They just let me go. "Stay out of it," the man in the suit had said. His voice was calm, almost amused. "This has nothing to do with you." But just as I was stepping out of the car, he leaned in and added something else. "Your wife has belonged to someone else for a long time. I should have let it go." I didn't. I was still shaking when I got the text. "Unknown number. You deserve to know the truth." Attached was a location pin. I stared at it for a long time, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't recognize the address, but I knew what I was about to find there. I drove anyway. The house was in an upscale neighborhood, tucked behind tall hedges with a sleek black car parked in the driveway. The kind of place where no one asked questions, where privacy was expected. I turned off my headlights and rolled to a stop a few houses down, watching. The lights were on. A silhouette passed by the window. She was laughing, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. A man walked up behind her, wrapped an arm around her waist, and whispered something in her ear. She leaned into him. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I could have left. I didn't. Instead, I stepped out of the car and moved closer. There was a gap in the curtains, just enough for me to see inside. The living room was warm, inviting. Candles flickered on the table. A bottle of wine sat half-empty next to two glasses. She was curled up on the couch, barefoot, wearing nothing but an oversized shirt, his shirt. I felt something inside me snap. They weren't just having an affair. This was a life. A second life she had built outside of me, outside of everything we had. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I had spent weeks uncovering her secrets, convinced that whatever she was involved in was dangerous. And maybe it still was. But right now, none of that mattered. Because this was personal. I didn't remember moving, didn't remember making the decision to walk up the driveway. But suddenly, I was at the door, and it wasn't locked. I pushed it open. The moment she saw me, her smile vanished. For a second, no one moved. Then the guy stood up, stepping between us like I was the intruder in his home. "Hey man, you need to." I punched him. He stumbled back, hitting the table, knocking over a glass. Wine spilled across the floor. Laura shot up from the couch. "What the hell are you doing here?" I stared at her, chest rising and falling too fast, my hands still curled into fists. That was what she had to say. Not an apology, not an explanation, just anger that I had ruined her night. Something inside me turned ice cold. I exhaled sharply, forcing my body to relax. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out. She didn't chase me. She didn't have to, because the damage was already done. And now, it was my turn to decide what happened next. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel, so tight my knuckles ached. The city blurred past me, neon signs flashing like warnings I refused to listen to. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily wrapped around him, the way she smiled, the way she didn't even look guilty. I wasn't sure what was worse, the betrayal or the fact that she didn't even bother to pretend she regretted it. At some point, I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there. My mind was a storm, circling the same questions over and over. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And why did it feel like this was about more than just an affair? Then my phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Looking for answers? Start with James Carter. A name. Just a name. And I knew exactly what to do with it. Carter wasn't hard to track down. Guys like him never were. Wealthy, powerful men always left a trail. Real estate records, business transactions, high-profile deals. And Carter had plenty of them. A developer with deep ties to city contracts, luxury high-rises, and more money than he probably knew what to do with. One of those high-rises? Funded by Emily's firm. I clenched my jaw as I stared at my laptop screen. This wasn't just cheating. This was business. I needed to see him. Not in an office, not in some carefully controlled public setting. I needed to catch him off guard. So I found his home address. And I drove there. His house was exactly what I expected. Modern, expensive, the kind of place that screamed power. Tall gates, security cameras, everything designed to keep people like me out. But lights were on inside, and through the massive windows, I saw movement. I parked down the street and watched. Then, through the glass, I saw her. Emily. She was standing in his kitchen, sipping wine, laughing at something he said. Not rushed, not secretive, like she belonged there. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't just an affair. This was something established. I could have stormed up to the house, made a scene, demanded answers. But instead, I sat there, watching, letting the reality sink in. Then, after a few minutes, I stepped out of the car. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed to get closer. I moved quietly, staying in the shadows as I made my way along the side of the property. The fence wasn't as high as I expected. Climbable. I didn't let myself think too much before gripping the top and pulling myself over. The backyard was pristine. A pool, manicured lawn, a perfect little patio. I crouched behind one of the decorative bushes, watching through the glass doors. They were closer now. Emily had set her glass down, her hands resting on Carter's chest. He leaned in, murmuring something against her hair. She smiled. I exhaled slowly. I needed to get out of there before I did something stupid. I turned to leave and ran straight into someone. A hand closed around my wrist, strong, unyielding. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up. A man I didn't recognize, dressed in black, eyes cold and assessing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice calm, like he was stating a fact. I yanked my arm back, but he didn't let go. Instead, he leaned in slightly. "This is your only warning. Walk away." A chill ran down my spine. He knew who I was. He knew why I was here. I jerked my arm free and took a step back, my pulse hammering. The man didn't chase me. He just stood there, watching as I climbed back over the fence and walked away. I could still feel his grip on my wrist long after I got back in my car. Carter wasn't just some random guy Emily was screwing. He was someone I wasn't supposed to mess with. And now, he knew I was watching. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every time she spoke, every time she smiled, I saw it. The lie. The way she had looked at him. The way she had touched him, laughed with him, let herself belong to him. For a year. A whole goddamn year. I wanted to tear her world apart. But I wasn't going to do it in a way she expected. I started with Carter. I wasn't interested in sending him cryptic texts or warnings. No. I wanted to know what made him vulnerable. Money? Reputation? Family? I dug into his business, his finances, his personal life. His company was clean on the surface, but the deeper I looked, the more cracks I found. Lawsuits settled quietly. Shady offshore accounts. Deals that looked just a little too perfect. And then, I found it. An active lawsuit. One that wasn't public yet. Someone was coming for him. Hard. And that someone? A former business partner with nothing left to lose. I made a note of the lawyer's name. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking control. Safi started to feel it. I wasn't acting the way she expected. I didn't lash out. Didn't ask questions. Didn't even change my routine. But she could sense something was different. At dinner, she kept glancing at me, her smile just a little too forced. She left her phone face down now. She started coming home earlier. And one night, as I walked past her in the hallway, she reached out and touched my arm. Just lightly. Just enough to test. "We're okay, right?" she asked, voice careful. I turned, met her eyes, let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I smiled. "Of course." She exhaled, relieved. She had no idea. The moment of truth came a few days later. I had left a few breadcrumbs for her. Just small things. A bank statement left open on my laptop. A file on my desk, one she would be too curious not to peek at. And finally a question. One morning, as she was leaving for work, I leaned against the counter and said it casually. "So, how's Carter's?" Her keys slipped in her hand. Just for a second. Just long enough. She recovered fast, forcing a laugh. "Oh." I shrugged. "James Carter. Real estate guy. I saw something about his firm in the news." She blinked, searching my face, trying to decide if I knew. I kept my expression neutral. "Oh," she said lightly. "Yeah, I think I've met him once or twice." "Why?" I just smiled. "No reason." She hesitated. I saw the gears turning in her head. Did I know? Was I testing her? She opened her mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away. Let her wonder. Let her feel it. Because now, I was the one pulling the strings. She thought she had everything under control. She thought she had me fooled. But tonight, she was going to learn what it felt like to be trapped. I planned it carefully. A business dinner, one she couldn't refuse. Carter would be there, along with several colleagues from her company. A high-end restaurant, a private table, a setting where she would least expect anything to go wrong. I watched from across the room, hidden in plain sight. She arrived right on time, smiling, looking effortlessly composed. Carter was already there, chatting with someone, confident as ever. She had no idea. Not yet. She kissed Carter's cheek when she reached the table. He whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. I clenched my jaw. I had seen that laugh before, when she used to look at me like that. I signaled the waiter. He approached their table, holding a sleek black envelope. "For Ms. Ellis," he said smoothly, handing it to her. Safi frowned, taking it cautiously. "What is this?" The waiter just smiled. "A special delivery." Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single photo. Her and Carter, together. One from the hotel, one from the bar, one from the moment she thought no one was watching. Her face drained of color. Carter leaned over, peering at the picture. Then his jaw tightened. "What the hell is this?" She looked up, scanning the restaurant. And then she saw me. I raised my glass from across the room. Her lips parted slightly, panic flashing in her eyes. She started to get up, but Carter grabbed her wrist. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Did you do this?" he hissed. I watched as realization dawned on her face. She wasn't just caught. She was exposed. Her world was crumbling, and there wasn't a single thing she could do to stop it. She found me outside after. The restaurant doors swung shut behind her as she rushed toward me. "Ethan." I held up a hand. "Don't." She stopped short, eyes pleading. "Please, just let me explain." "No," I said coldly. "You don't get to explain." Her breathing was shaky. "You humiliated me." I laughed. "You humiliated yourself." She swallowed hard, then whispered, "Do you still love me?" I tilted my head, studying her. Then I leaned in, close enough that she thought, just for a second, that I might say yes. Instead, I murmured, "You don't deserve to know." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see it in her eyes. The moment she realized that this wasn't just about me leaving her. This was about her losing everything. Carter wouldn't risk his reputation for her. Her colleagues would never look at her the same way. She wasn't walking away from this with just a broken heart. She was walking away with nothing. And that was the part that hurt her the most. I took one last look at her, then turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage.